I'd like to call the special meeting to order. It's a joint meeting between City Council and Historic District Commission. Michaela, would you like to do a roll call, please?
Sure. So for the HDC, we have Kristen Stein, who looks like is absent, Stacy Todd, Jason Raymaker, Eddie Quinones Walker. All right, we have a quorum for HDC, and then for council, we have Councilmember Zeter. Present. Councilmember Hands. Present. Councilmember Andrus. Here. Councilmember Redding.
Here.
Councilmember Morgan is absent. And then we have Mayor Pro Tem Byrd.
Here.
And Mayor Galloway.
Here.
You have a quorum for council.
Okay. Could we get a motion to excuse Bill? And do we have to excuse HDC as well?
Yeah, but we would need the HDC members to excuse Commissioner Kristen Stein. So let's start with the motion first for HDC.
Motion to excuse Kristen Stein.
Ask for support. Now say all in favor, Eddie. Thank you very much. I know it's a little different. You're kind of chairing the HDC, but not really.
All right, council, could we get a motion?
I'll move to excuse Councilmember Morgan.
Second.
It has been moved and supported. All in favor, please signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. If we could all stand and rehearse the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we would take any public comment for items not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on down to number 5, which is discussion items. It's a discussion with SHPO regarding the Historic District Commission's findings report.
Okay, I'm going to just do an introduction, and then I will pass it off to
Thank you.
the Commission and Council. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time on an irregular night to meet, both for the Historic District Commissioners and City Council members. Tonight is really to have a discussion with SHPO. We have Alan Higgins from the State Historic Preservation Office. He drove in this evening for this meeting. And to have what I'm going to call just an open discussion, an honest discussion about where we are with our HDC. As council and the commission members for the HDC are well aware, you spent the past year coming up with evaluating our current HDC policies, guidelines, processes, et cetera. You presented a recommendation to City Council 2 months ago in November of 2022. Council received that report. They've had a discussion. The HDC had a discussion, and then there was a comment made at the HDC that it would be nice if we could have a joint discussion and really hear from City Council, what you would want the HDC to do. And then that report was shared with the representatives at SHPO. Alan Higgins is representing them this evening. In front of you, you have, besides the agenda, you have the recommendations from the HDC. It's this document, it's not their whole report, it's just the recommendations. And on the last 2 pages of that is where you have what I call their final recommendation, or what they title their final recommendation. And then you have a letter from SHPO that, is the word I'm going to use, a response to what they saw when they saw that final recommendation. This is still, in my opinion, a process. And we're at the point now where we just need to have that open, honest discussion, between the Historic District Commission, City Council, and, representatives from the SHPO. Again, Allegan Higgins is here. And we got, the Trips are in the audience this evening as well. So, with that, I'm going to probably kick it over to the City Council. And Mayor, I'm going to ask you to kind of just guide the conversation and kind of see, it's more or less a roundtable discussion right now. Specific questions have been, asked over the past 2 months. You can ask those questions directly of Alan as the conversation goes on. More conversations might go up. I do know that there are representatives from the HDC that just kind of want to hear from city council directly in an open meeting of where you want us to go. And I'm sure they're going to be comfortable asking those questions as well. Am I missing anything from the HDC, or am I speaking out of turn? Please push the green button. Thank you.
So it was my understanding that at this meeting, we are going to be discussing with Alan, based on the letter that we received, it sounded like our final recommendation would cause us to lose CLG status. And we kind of wanted to work together to figure out where in there was, that breaking point. Because I know the last discussion we had with you, you told us, you preserve what your community wants you to preserve. And so that's what we kind of did. And then, finding out that it may not work for our CLG status. And we just kind of want to figure out where that is and if there is some sort of a compromise we can reach to maintain status while still, serving our community the best we can. So.
If I can work that correctly. First of all, thank you for having me back out here. I know it's been, I think, a couple months, September maybe last time I was out here, so I appreciate coming back out and talking with you guys. So definitely happy to address any questions, concerns, specifically in terms of what you guys have put forth, as well as the letter. I do kind of want to start out by saying that I think, so when we wrote this letter, just kind of in hindsight and having the full awareness of where things are at right now. That was unfortunately without the full context of where things currently are. I think when we wrote this letter, there was some assumption that there was a finality to things in terms of what was presented as kind of an endpoint. Here's where we're going with things, rather than here are our recommendations as kind of a point on the continuum of that discussion, with a decision still to be made about where that's going to go in terms of keeping the HDC, reforming the HDC, and so on. So that letter, in some respects, is a little premature, if you will, and for that, I do apologize at the end of the day, and that's on us in terms of not having that full context when we put that together. So I do want to start out by saying that to get going with things. And I do hope that at the end of the day, it has not, or does not, detract from what you guys have done over the last year, the city through council and the Historic District Commission, because there's been a lot of good conversation that's happened. You guys have put a lot of time, energy, and effort into figuring out what makes sense for the community, where you want to go, and that is greatly appreciated. Quite frankly, some communities wouldn't do that. They would just say, okay, well, we're doing this or we're not doing it, and that would be the end of the conversation. But you guys took that approach of stepping back to make sure that regardless of which way things do go, that it makes sense for you guys. So I do want to say that, I appreciate that time, and again, I hope that this letter in and of itself, again, we can talk about the language in there, but I don't want that to take away from what's been done to date, because again, I think there's a lot of good work there. I think there are viable options in terms of the recommendations that have been put forth. Should council want to continue with conversations about the HDC and its relation to the community. So I hope that does not take away, because I certainly don't want to devalue from what you guys have done through the past year or so. As it relates specifically to CLG status and kind of where that may fall. So so at the end of the day, what underlies CLG status is the local historic district ordinance that's established under PA 169, which is state law. So I don't want to get into too much of the nitty-gritty, to start with. Happy to go wherever the conversation may be, but when a community joins into the CLG program, their ordinance has to comply with state law. That's not a decision that we make about what PA 169 says as it relates to local historic districts or what it doesn't state. We don't police PA 169. Again, it's state law. It's open to interpretation, or as little interpretation as any other state law is at the end of the day. But we're not the police of PA 169, so to speak. That said, for participation in the CLG program, every community that participates in the CLG program has an ordinance that complies with PA 169. So we currently have 41 communities that participate in the CLG program, range from Detroit to the village of Calumet in the UP. So all sorts of sizes, capacity, everything in between. None of them do preservation perfectly. That's quite frankly, doesn't exist a community that has everything figured out, because, it's something that every community struggles with sometimes, because you have these situations that involve people and property, and like any other planning or land-based decision, there's the realities of what those impacts are, and you go back and forth with those sorts of things. So while that is the underlying framework, each community does things within that context a little bit differently. And the way that typically works out is in terms of how they review what we call kind of major categories of work, minor categories of work. And those are different ways that communities address how they review things that they, and I'll use this phrase lightly, but unofficially or informally, what they care about more or what they care about less, and I don't mean in the way that it sounds, but there are certain things in our communities that are more important to the fabric of our communities, the way that our communities feel, the aesthetic value, all those good things. And some of it comes down to the character of those resources, the places in those communities. We have some communities that have a lot of high-style architecture, and it is all about the materials, the ornamentation, everything that goes into the building fabric. We have communities that, they have more modest buildings that have been incorporated into their historic districts. We were just talking about Kalamazoo, for example. A lot of their residential historic districts were historically workers' housing, so there wasn't a lot of detail to them, but the importance is found in kind of the concentration of place and the feeling that you get going down the street and so on. And so I think regardless, assuming that things continue and there is some kind of reform aspect, the thing that I guess I want to make sure is clear, when saying that it's your all's community, and I do mean that, it's your all's community. You guys are the experts at the end of the day. I'm not an expert on your history. I'm not an expert on what's important to you guys at the local level. So that is for Allegan to figure out, and that is figuring it out in terms of what is designated as a local historic district. Obviously, there are places that are already on the books as local historic districts that have been on the books for a long time. There are processes for modifying those local historic districts. Should the opinion change about what a historic district should be in Allegan? Again, that's built into state law. We can talk about that process. It's not something we control at the end of the day. But there are ways to deal with those things if things have changed, because, communities change over time. Whether it's changes to individual properties within designated districts or infill development or what have you. So there are different ways to look at those if maybe what made sense 20 years ago no longer makes sense, for example. Again, there are also ways to look at things kind of structurally and programmatically in terms of here's what we review at an HDC level. Here's what is administratively approved, so that's a property owner can just go on with their work and not be burdened, so to speak, without having to show up to a monthly meeting and so on. When we, in that letter, in the context of that, I think what gave us hesitancy, and again, I'm saying this now with the full understanding that what is presented is part of the discussion, not a point of finality, is that, it's hard on paper to say, well, we're just not going to do anything related to X right now, because there's a lot of nuance that goes into that at the end of the day, depending on how you deal with that. Again, whether that's administrative approvals, whether it's full review by the HDC, whether it's revising the boundaries or status of certain resources within historic districts. And again, I think that firmness of that language in that letter is on us at the end of the day, because we didn't have the full context, again, of where some of that conversation was at. So I think should there be a desire to continue to move forward with having the HDC and looking at ways for the HDC to quote-unquote do better, which is the point. We all want to do better. Again, nobody does preservation perfectly. It's all about incremental progress over time. There are ways to deal with some of those nuances. And if the HDC says, hey, based on what's in our community, what's in our local historic district, yeah, we don't care so much about the nuances of whether they're replacing, windows on the side of a house so much, because that's not as important. It's more about the streetscape feel and so on. There are ways to do that through minor work reviews and things like that without saying, well, we're not going to look at these things all together, so to speak, because the challenge becomes you want to give yourself room to kind of operate if you do see something that is worthy of attention down the road. And so, there's a lot of discussion that goes into that over the long term, so to speak. So I would, again, despite what is on paper there, I would not hold firm to that as kind of a conclusive statement about the status of things. Again, with now the understanding that there's still discussion to be had about what form those recommendations take as conversations continue at the local level based on kind of structural changes or programmatic changes or what have you that you guys may want to investigate. So I'll stop there. That was a lot of words thrown at you. Again, I don't want to dig too much into the nuance unless you really want to go there, and I'm certainly happy to. But hopefully that addressed at least that point.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. I guess, anybody want to speak on council? Do we want to go in order? How do you want to do it? Okay, Delora, Dave, do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll take a minute just to acknowledge the good work of the study and, also acknowledge council's support during this process and their patience in getting through to this point. What I see in front of us is the three options that the HDC report laid out, and they're pretty straightforward. One is keep things exactly the way they are. 2 is get rid of it. 3 is reform it. And we've heard support from Alan from the CLG on working through the nuance and details of what that reform could look like. So ultimately, I think at this point, it's a decision that's on council's table, and I think we just need a commitment to one of those 3 options.
So we have the 3 options. We also have a recommendation. Are we discussing the 3 options, or are we discussing HDC's recommendation? I guess I want clarity for that.
Whatever we'd like to discuss, any questions that we might have for SHPO, if we want to talk about the recommendation, talk about the proposals, whatever we want to talk about.
I was a fan of the recommendation. If we can figure out a way to keep some of the good things that we have with CLG status, that's good, but I like the recommendation. I think that's good for the city, even though it's not probably a perfect answer. I think it's the best one I've seen.
Eddie, can we please use the mic? We are being live recorded, so the residents can see what's being discussed.
So, am I understanding correctly that it is council's opinion that we should keep CLG status? We should do what it takes to keep CLG status? Because I think that was one of the, when we came up and talked back in, what was it, December? I think that was one of the big linchpins in the deal.
That's my opinion on it, because otherwise we're just creating a section of the city that doesn't get the benefits of the historic tax benefits and the like of being recognized under the PA 169.
Very quickly.
Still federally
Well, you're federally recognized, but
I just want to, real quick, Alan and I just talked to each other. CLG status only benefits the government entity.
Yeah.
It does not benefit property owners.
the PA 169, well, the property owners for the state tax credit now that's available.
Yeah, so just for a little bit of context, so as relates to tax credits specifically, so it's not connected to the CLG program specifically, but it is connected to PA 169. So what the qualifications are for a property owner, either commercial or residential, to be eligible for the state historic preservation tax credit in Michigan, is that their property has to be listed in either the National Register of Historic Places, the State Register of Historic Sites, so those cast iron green markers that you see scattered about, or they have to be part of a local historic district. So that pathway for the state preservation tax credit can take any one of those three. You don't have to have a combination of those. It could be any one of those three. So what would happen if, let's say, for example, the ordinance did go away, is that those property owners that their pathway is because of that local designation, if there was no longer an ordinance that met state requirements, those property owners would no longer have access to the state tax credit unless they could achieve it by one of those other pathways. And I don't know, the number off the top of my head, how many fall into which pot, but it eliminates one of those pathways for accessing state tax credits. As it relates to the CLG benefits specifically, there is a distinction in terms, so we do have grants through the CLG program, which may have been discussed. The city of Allegan has had the opportunity to have close to a dozen of those over time. I think the last one was in 2016 was the last time we received an application. So those funds are available to our CLG communities every year. So that is one of the main benefits of the program, because there just aren't a lot of opportunities for historic preservation funding in the state of Michigan. There is an important distinction there that when you're talking about physical improvements to a place, so the bricks and mortar work, those do go to either the municipality, a nonprofit, or public entity. So we've done work here through Griswold, we've done work at the library, we've done work at the theater, but we can't fund physical improvement to private property through those grants. That said, there is a different arm of those grants where we can do some of the foundational pieces of preservation, if you will, that queue up property owners to be able to take advantage of preservation incentives. So we can pay for properties to get their, or property owners to get their properties listed in the National Register of Historic Places, for example. That does open up the door for state and federal historic preservation tax credits. We can pay for municipalities to hire architects to help with local facade programs and do design work on for the benefit of private property owners. So there is some intermingling on that side, but it is a distinction at the end of the day.
So what I was looking at was, as far as the recommendations, the part that makes it not PA 169 compliant seems to be number 1, which was removing the guidelines pertaining to exterior projects without building permit requirements. However, couldn't we just designate that over to our code inspector that already does some of those? And also look at what our standards are. I know we have to follow the national standard, but we do have allowments to say whether the thing is really that historic, because there's different levels of preservation. It's not just everybody's got to be preserved exactly the same because you designate a property as medium, high, or low in our survey. And that was on point to make sure what level of preservation really that was to pertain to it. Now, that's why I'm like, if we just made that more of a, because we've already discussed in the past that those standards aren't hardline standards, that they're not, oh, you have to use wood because it was wood, because we've already discussed in the past that wood's not exactly the same as old wood to new wood. Using cement board that has the same texture, look, feel, doesn't take away from the historicness of the structure. So that's why I'm looking like what in this recommendations eliminates us from the PA 169, as well as there's some other things in PA 169 when I was looking at it that we're probably not following as well, but smoke detectors or smoke systems are a requirement. We're above 5,000 population. Our historic district should have a 7-member board instead of our current. So we got to look at all those, but I do want to just see like how could we work this recommendation to make it easier because the whole point of this was that our standards are all over the place. Like some people were getting approved for this and not approved for that, and it just made it really cumbersome for a lot of people that are in the historic district that they're like, they just never felt like they were actually working with the historic district, felt like they were fighting against them for some members of the district that they didn't want to do work.
Peter, I have a clarification question real quick. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Are you saying number 1 under the final recommendation, instead of remove the strict guidelines language, have it be that, these projects, siding repair, replacement of windows and doors, replacement of architectural details is reviewed at like a staff level?
And yeah, we can designate that under PA 169 staff level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hang on 1 second. I just want, just to clarify to the original questions, the CLG to get the tax credit, even if we lose the CLG, our districts and the homes inside those districts are still in the National Registry.
Correct, so those that are.
And that would
list-
still lead to people getting a tax credit. So
If-
that's not a holdup at this point.
Correct. If they're in the National Register, that status does not change. It would only be if the only pathway is for that local district and the ordinance goes away, then they lose that pathway. But yeah, nothing changes with the National Register status of any properties in association with any of these conversations that we're having.
So that solves the state tax credit for me if we know that they're in the National Registry. And then it just comes down to if we want any CLG funding for any of ours, which include the Griswold, the Regent, the library. Do we want to maintain it for that? And that's where I originally talked also, why do we have the district so large? That was kind of my original, when we started this discussion long ago, was our districts are oversized. A lot of properties in it really probably shouldn't be. You know, it's like 430 properties.
It's large districts, yeah. Yeah, and then just to your, your point a second ago about kind of the changes that could happen in terms of review status of different things. That's where I was kind of initially going with some of that nuance about where this discussion, could go, assuming that reform is on the table. Because communities do have that purview under PA 169 to say, we want to assign these 10, 20 categories of work to be administratively approved, and then those get assigned to the inspector or zoning official or whoever it is in the community. The way that works under PA 169 is the HDC comes up with that list and gives them to that person and says, we essentially bestow the power to you to administratively approve these types of changes to properties within the local historic district. That person can then, as long as they, broadly speaking, meet the intent of what you all want them to look for, meet the intent of the standards, sign off and let those property owners go about their business. So it doesn't tie them up for having to wait on a meeting, particularly if it's a minor project. It just facilitates things. And then that person that is assigned that duty reports out to you guys on a quarterly basis the results of those reviews. And so the HDC could then say, okay, well, we want to give you these additional things to review that we, also consider minor projects. Or you may say, well, we want to pull these back and we want to start looking at these things. There's some play that goes along with that. And again, that's where that nuance is in terms of kind of working through the, kind of structural arrangement of how things work in Allegan specifically, because every community does that a little bit differently. Some communities have their HDC review everything because that's how that particular HDC wants it to be. There are some communities where they have delegated administrative approval for 40 different categories of work because, again, they only want to see a handful of different types of things that at the end of the day that have a real potential to impact a property. There's a lot of leeway within that. Again, that's a local decision as to what you guys would feel is appropriate for HDC review versus administrative approval. But that is certainly a viable pathway for kind of figuring out that point one under the recommendation about how you guys want to deal with these changes, deal with potential reviews to not tie up people, so to speak, for things that really don't require that additional level of because nobody wants, that's defeatist to the whole purpose if that's the end result of this is everybody's getting tied up. It has to be carefully balanced with the intent and kind of merit of where you're going. So again, there's a lot of nuance in that at the end of the day. But, if you guys do decide to carry it forward, and I certainly hope that you do, and again, I've said it before, but, I'm happy to be part of those conversations to the extent that, you guys want that support and that assistance. We can work through those things, provide examples for how different communities have done them over time. So again, don't want to force ourselves into that conversation, but we would be happy to support it, should that be the decision that's made.
So just real quick, following up on Jason's, because I think this is important. So Alan, what I'm hearing you say is if the property is listed in a local historic district, so any of our 5 or 6 historic districts we have, and those are all listed in the National Register, which is a list up there, they are all eligible for the property tax credit through the state as it stands right now, regardless if we have a local ordinance.
Correct. The National Register status of the properties does not change, yes.
So even though they're not individual sites listed, their addresses within a district, we're still okay. Because I think, Jason, that's what you were asking, right? It's just verification.
I am crossing Ts and dotting Is at this point.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do.
Yeah, and there, I will say to that point, just for clarification, so the National Register, and again, this is a whole aside, but You know, there was a conversation about properties that are historic versus non-historic, so to speak. That carries for the National Register too. When we're talking about properties that relate to the significance of an area, they retain their character and so on. So that same standard that is used for a local district status is what it carries for National Register status as well. So the National Register status would not change regardless of what is done at the local level. But the reasons that certain properties were included were based, theoretically, at the time, were based on the same considerations. Again, some of that changes over time as properties change, but that's kind of the relationship of those two elements at the end of the day.
Okay, I have a question, and this is more so for Joel. So the city pays PCI or any code enforcement agency to do this review work, correct?
Correct, yeah, they're a contractor for the city of Allegan.
Would you say over the last 30 years or so, throughout all of this, we've spent over $300,000 on that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Because that's what we've received in grant funding, am I correct in that? Through the CLG? About $300,000?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number, but that's about, yeah, I think there were 10 grants between 1996 or 97 and 2016, if I'm recalling correctly, that came
Okay.
to the city for rehab as well as National Register work. I think there was some design, doing the initial iteration of the Historic District Commission website, maybe some design guidelines work, but yeah, about that total.
I'm just thinking, you know, if we're going to be increasing PCI's workload to administratively approve all these projects, I mean, we better be securing some grant funding to offset those costs. That would be really important. And if we can establish that we're spending more on having PCI do this, and then we're receiving through grant funding, I mean.
You just nip that in the bud, you won't be spending more. They're already doing full reviews on every COA. So
Okay,
we're
so it would
already
be the
spending,
same.
there
It
won't be
wouldn't-
additional money going to PCI. They're already spending all that. So I see where you're going, and
Yeah.
it's a logical, according to me, it's a logical process you're going through, but yeah, they're already spending that money.
So it
The
wouldn't
city's already spending
increase
that money.
necessarily, it wouldn't increase the cost.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, as council's discussing this, and, you know, this is, I'm just gonna ask a hard question now. And I told Alan I was gonna ask this question before we got started here. One of the concerns PCI has had, and one of the concerns I, as a city manager that had to administer this, you know, what I'm just gonna call it the program, whether it's the Historic District Commission minutes, application reviews, is this commitment to making it smooth for the residents, and a yes answer is quick. We have approved several improvement projects. You know, wood windows that were being placed with, you know, vinyl windows because the property owner said it's too expensive to do wood. But there weren't follow-up conversations. Siding projects where wood siding was covered up with vinyl siding. And in that process, you lost architectural details. You lost, you know, frieze boards. You lost corner boards, that kind of stuff. You know, when you talk about your option one here, you know, and this is more for the HDC, are you saying you're comfortable going that route in our historic districts, that you're more concerned about preserving the structure and making the ownership of that structure simplified for that owner than you are than preserving the detail on that structure? Because I think that, to me, that's kind of a gut check, you know, question for the community and for the Historic District Commission and City Council to ask. I'm not sure, I mean, I have my own personal opinion on how I think that plays out on being a historic preservation community, but I want to make sure we don't, you know, go down a path where if it's staff review of this and it's just expected, we're just going to mark yes, yes, yes to every application, unless it's, you know, enlarging or enclosing doorways and windows, which is what I think you get into number 2 there.
Can you restate your question?
Sure. Are you okay with every house in the historic districts having vinyl siding and vinyl windows?
I am okay with that, and I believe we are okay with that. Based on the conversations that we've had with the public, that is what the public wants. The public does not want us to control those sorts of projects. They want to be able to do it, and we believe that their main concern is providing or preserving the streetscape, the overall feel of the city. You know, making sure that it is obvious that we have these old homes, these historic homes, and we feel that those sorts of projects, putting up vinyl siding, putting on vinyl windows, putting in different doors, things like that, are not going to detract from that and what the public wants.
I believe that's what council also wants, in my opinion. We tried to challenge something about a year and a half ago, and we're pretty much told by a council member, I don't know the specific one, but it was brought down to us at our council meeting to more or less back off and let them do what they want to do. That home ripped their siding off, ripped all their windows out and their roof off in a weekend, changed the size of every single window in their home, put all brand new vinyl windows in, and we were told, let it ride. So that's the feeling that I get. No, I'm sorry you guys are all up there now. This was a year and a half ago, or about a year ago. But that's the representation that's given to us. Our hands were slapped. We were pretty much told, somebody's trying to improve their home, trying to improve the community, go ahead and let them do it. That's a gut check. I mean, that's a gut check that I had at that time, and I'm like, well, dang, okay. But I believe, I don't think somebody's gonna come in here and mess up their own home. I would agree. Somebody's trying to improve their home. Somebody's trying to make the community better. As long as it's aesthetically appealing to what was there, I don't see the issue with it. They're pulling out old windows and they're still holding that grid pattern, maintaining that grid pattern and style there. They're pulling off their siding. They're putting on a comparable siding, lap style, whatever it is. I'm okay with that. That being said, other parts of this, the recommendations and the different ones that we had going, I mean, our district is huge. It's 460 some properties. I went through every single property. I bet there are probably 60 to 80 properties that still have wood windows and wood siding. The rest have all been modified, additions off the back, so they got a different window style than the window style in the front. Vinyl windows are in. They got aluminum siding. They got vinyl siding on it. It's been covered up. It's metal roof on top. I mean, when this originally happened, some of the original people that were involved in this said it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to the community losing for the previous courthouse. And they said they may have, in retrospect, they admitted to maybe being a little too pushy with the boundaries and stuff like that. And that's something, if we can narrow it back down, maybe we can have, a more focused vision of what our historic district should look like. And that's totally plausible. And then that would change maybe this layout, it wouldn't be everything's just a yes kind of thing.
And if I could, Mayor. Jason, that's been my concern since I got on council and this became a discussion. It's been several years. It's been more than the last year that you guys have been doing this study. This was a conversation pretty much as soon as I got on council in 2018. And pardon the phrase, but the dysfunction of our Historic District Commission. I can say I just went through the process. I had contractors that did not even want to come out to give me an estimate just based on the reputation of Allegan and our Historic District Commission. So I personally feel that it's way too large. I have kind of wanted to see a survey happen, and we just kind of keep the ones that we feel are important to the community. And I think that we've got some ideas of what those are. The Pritchard Estate, the Regent, the Griswold, the library, and whether a lot of those are going to be our public buildings that would continue to keep us in the CLG status. Is that correct, Alan? If we have districts, they're some of our public buildings, we would still maintain CLG status? Or do there have to be private properties that are designated?
So CLG status specifically is not dependent on the number or type of local historic districts you actually have. CLG status is dependent on having a local historic district ordinance that complies with state law and an appointed historic district commission. So again, we have 41 communities that participate in the CLG program. We have 85 communities, I think, that have local historic district ordinances across the state. There are some of those communities that only have one local historic district that is comprised of one single building, and that is still okay. Again, every community is going to figure out on their own what is important to protect within that framework of local historic district status. But there's no requirement for PA 169, broadly speaking, or CLG status that you have to have X number of local historic districts or you have to have X type of properties within those local historic districts. What would be important is that should the community decide to reevaluate, so to speak, what is important and look at either modifying existing districts or eliminating districts or establishing new single site districts, whatever it may be, is following the procedure that's outlined in state law for that. There's a very specific procedure for doing that. That includes a public hearing and all that good stuff that usually goes into any public planning process. That's a totally municipal level process where we're not involved other than those studies come to us for review, an advisory review. We don't approve or disapprove them. Again, we don't regulate PA 169. It's not a power that we have at the end of the day. So we provide advisory review about those discussions, but ultimately it's up to the municipality to say, hey, we have followed these standards for modifying a historic district. Here's our recommendation of what that new historic district is, or eliminating a district, and then council approves or doesn't approve the ordinance, for that particular action. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's an important one I think that there is no distinction that you have to have a certain type number or kind of breadth of local historic districts for CLG. It's just that you have to have a compliant ordinance and you have to have the HDC.
Okay, thank you for that, I appreciate it. So I guess where I'm going with that, more or less, is I believe our ordinance as written now, that's when council would appoint this study group to evaluate the elimination, reduction, or addition of historic districts. Quite frankly, I would like to see the downtown as a historic district, which would encompass the Regent and the Griswold, the library, and maybe not anything much farther away. There are a few buildings, but for the most part, this list was created 40 years ago, and there's been a lot of work that's been done on the majority of these houses in that 40 years, which have maybe taken them what I would consider off that registry. So that's where I'm at. Whether that's a complete, I don't know if I'm on my own with that or not.
So Delora, are you saying that maybe the first step we should do is start looking at resizing our districts?
For me, absolutely, and I mean, we need to make sure that our ordinance complies with PA 169. I don't know that it does at this point.
If that's the route you're going, that's fine. It would be hiring somebody to do a study of every home. Correct, Joel? Would be the first step that would need to happen. Or Alan?
Yeah, so council would appoint a study committee that would be in charge of that. Every community does it a little bit differently. Sometimes that study committee does, they're volunteers at the end of the day. They do all that work themselves. Sometimes the municipality does hire a consultant to do it. Sometimes they'll, out of their own general fund. We do have grant funds for historic district study committee reports and things like that as well through CLG. But yeah, either volunteer or consultant generally doing that study committee report at the end of the day. It's not a hard and fast requirement that a consultant has to do it, but some communities just choose to do that for efficiency's sake more than anything else.
Alan, I have a quick question. Going off, what the lawyer was speaking right there, is it possible for the city to go through that process, recreate a local district that's more focused, while at the same time not removing any of our existing districts because they're still registered in the National Register? So I think it's referred to as the Winchester House on Marshall Street, the old Community Foundation building.
Yep.
If someone wanted to invest, I mean, that building's been invested in multiple times, but if someone wanted to do a major investment, and they wanted to qualify for the state historic tax credit. Do you see where I'm going? I mean, I'm kind of, almost, is there like a hybrid process possible? Because I think there are some, I hear council and I hear HDC saying it's a pretty big districts. There's lots of properties. But I would almost argue in each of those districts, there's probably one or two houses that are, historically significant to the history of this community and architecturally important. They have some detail on them that you don't want to see go away. I mean, if you just focus on the downtown, I understand that. Man, the Delano Inn, and not just because it's my neighbor, I hope nothing ever changes on that house. I hope the detail always stays. I hope the wood trim always stays. I hope the carriage house always stays, because it is such a significant structure, I think, to the history of this city. To me, it's a very important one. The Winchester, I mentioned that one on Marshall. Any of the ones on Davis, or 3 of the 4 on Davis, are all significant homes that I think if they wanted to invest, I would not want to pull that credit from them, because we're struggling with some significant issues here, but I don't want them to be, have a negative impact of our struggle.
So Joel, so are you suggesting or throwing out there, maybe we keep the districts that we have and only pick certain structures that we have more, I don't want to say control, but that we have more say-so or more,
That would be my suggestion,
okay.
is
okay.
that, I don't want to
I
speak
want to
for
know how,
Joel,
Right.
I
but
want to know how legal it is, because at the end of the day,
That
you have to
was
comply with
my
PA
concern.
169.
Okay,
Yeah, so what happens when you have a historic district? And again, not to get too far in the weeds, but broadly speaking, and recognizing that these districts have been on the books for a while, and so the way that we do things now or recommend that they are done now, is different than 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however long. But generally speaking, when a historic district is established, and that includes if a historic district is being modified, whatever that new boundary may be, you categorize each property within that district, regardless of the age of that property. So it could have been a structure that was built 2 years ago or whatever. If it's in that boundary, you categorize it as either a contributing building or a non-contributing building to that district. And contributing buildings are those that, broadly speaking, still retain their historic character, and they are associated with the reasons that that district is significant. So, let's say it was a 1930s residential community. It's a 1930s house. It still, broadly speaking, contains its form, its height, massing, all that good stuff. Maybe it's had a little bit of material changed, but it would be considered contributing to that district because it was associated with the reason it was established. If you have a 1995 structure next door, it could still be within that boundary of the district, but it would be considered non-contributing. Why that is important is because whereas if it's in a historic district, under state law, the HDC, or whoever they have delegated administrative approval to at the city level, you're still reviewing work within that district. That's the way that PA 169 works. But if it's a non-contributing property, you aren't necessarily so much worried about the kind of minutia of every element of that building, but rather, are they going to put an addition on that is going to detract from everything else that's in the neighborhood? Or are they going to change their, put a porch that extends to the right-of-way and disrupts that pattern of streetscapes, or whatever it may be? So that contributing, non-contributing status becomes important because it's then the framework by which reviews happen at the end of the day. And those properties that are contributing are those ones that, generally speaking, do retain their character. They have materials that are important. They have their massing. They retain that sense of place. And those are the ones that there may, and I'll use the phrase loosely, but you know, you have more things that you're looking for on them because it is about the individual detail of that property. So again, that's some of the nuance that happens as a result of how you strike out the different levels of reviews that happen for an HDC or administrative approvals. But that all comes back to the process when a historic district is established, is putting that on the books as to why a property could be considered contributing or non-contributing. And the importance of that beyond the functional kind of workings of the community is that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, again, PA 169 is state law, and it helps the community to make sure that it's making defensible decisions at the end of the day. As with any other zoning or planning matter, you want to have defensible decisions, and so that contributing, non-contributing status that goes on the books when you're looking at these things kind of becomes that benchmark for how decisions are made, so that if something is challenged, you can go back and say, well, we documented this property in January 2023, here are the important characteristics, here's why it was, you know, designated or included as part of this district, and so on. So there, you know, beyond, you know, kind of preservation best practices, there is a legal reason to do that, just as there is, again, with any other planning practice at the municipal level. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
So that is a process then that we would have to go through, Joel, or has that been done?
Our
Do we
current
have
survey.
contributing and
It would
non-contributing?
have to, I believe it would have to be through that survey that the contributing and non-contributing would be determined.
Yeah, so at the time, again, it was a little more iffy, back when they did these original studies, but what would happen if you were to look at modifying district boundaries, so to speak? A study committee would get appointed, and they themselves, or through a consultant or whoever, would do the work to identify those properties and assign a status to them, through that. And that would get codified as part of the ordinance, you know, should one be adopted at the end of the day to officially modify the boundaries. You know, that's kind of a simplified version, but yeah, essentially it would happen at the time of a survey, when it's established, or at the time of modifying a boundary.
Well, we kind of already did that. That's why those properties have stars. Those are
Yeah.
historically significant properties. That's why we starred them, and then they're actually identified underneath and written about why they're historically significant, what year and all that. So we kind of already did, and even in our current HDC, it says that those are considered high priority, requiring the most preservation, and then the others become medium or low if you're not designated in there. So we kind of did that in that original survey. It's just, they don't call it historic, what is it? This
call
is
it-
called
yeah.
historically significant.
Historically significant site, and I cannot recall if we identified what the P stands for. I just can't recall.
What's the P?
Priority.
Priority? So I do not know the difference between what a priority site is and what a historically significant site is then. Because some are P stars, like right here, 310 River, and then some has stars, just a star, which is 222 Race. And then some have nothing, which is 212 Race.
I would think the P with the star is like the highest, like the most contributing to that district, but.
Could be, yeah. I just do not know that answer. It's not very clear.
I want you to look at this. So 103 River Street on there is starred. That is, right as you go over the bridge there, Village Market, go over the bridge out of town. The house directly, first house on the left, right there on River Street.
With the Halloween decorations or with the lights?
The one, the duplex that's there, and that is a historically significant. So there is a difference, in my opinion, of historically significance and old in this community. And this survey is far outdated, in my opinion. So those stars, to me, are something I don't think necessarily need to be looked at this point. It needs to be completely, if this is the route we're going, there needs to be a unanimous decision, more or less, either with you guys, us, whatever this commission or study or whatever next step is, of what that historical looks like. Because to me, that is far from what Allegan stands for.
Yeah, and
I almost feel like it's a point that we start over.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, yeah, because the study and, you know, everything that's been listed as, you know, what are they called? Not contributing, but.
Priority.
Priority. I mean, this study was done in what, 1984. And like you had said, there's been 40 years of work that has gone on, so I
Or
can
lack of
guarantee you, right, I
Or
can
lack of
guarantee
work.
you, a lot of those stars would probably not be stars anymore.
And, I mean, so I would say the point of the recommendation, point one of the recommendation was to make things more equitable, to streamline things, but it was also to ease the burden on people who bought in the district that maybe didn't know, or, you know, houses that are falling apart because they can't afford to do it the way HDC wants them to it, so they aren't doing anything. If we were gonna go the route of streamlining our districts, like you are suggesting, Delora, Councilman Andrews, I think that we have to be, we would have to set a very high bar for what gets a star, kind of going to what you're saying, Jason. And that I could support. If we're just gonna redo this and put everything back in, we're wasting everybody's time. So downtown, absolutely. We want to put the Pritchard Estate in there. If we want to put the, you know, some of the major, the Jade Inn, that big house on the corner of Cutler and Chestnut. Those are significant to me, they, you know, in the city, but most of the other stuff, it's nice, it's quaint, but it doesn't matter if they have vinyl siding or not. And if we can let people take care of their homes and improve the city, we should let them do that.
So am I understanding correctly in that we would keep the boundaries of the districts exactly the same, but we would just reclassify, redesignate the homes within them?
Can you designate an entire city as a district? But then you'd have to go through every home and say contributing or
Yeah,
not
I was like
contributing.
theoretically, probably, but in practice would be very difficult, yeah.
This is kind of exactly what it
I
is
mean, we do
already.
have,
Right.
you know, and we do have instances of like, you know, small communities, like, again, like the village of Calumet, where, you know, most of their, you know, historic district is the commercial core, you know, they've only got 300 buildings total, and I think their historic district is, you know, 140 of those or something like that. But yeah, what would happen at the end of the day, or what would need to happen is that, you know, if you kept the boundaries as they are, yeah, every building within that boundary would then be categorized as again, contributing, parentheses historic, non-contributing, parentheses non-historic. Regardless of age, type, condition, every property would be categorized as that. And then that would be the basis. The other path is looking at modifying the boundaries and say, okay, well, you know, and again, there's a framework in PA 169, so this is an oversimplified, you know, explanation, but looking at that and say, well, there's been so much change in this area, and it no longer retains those characteristics for which it was originally historic. So it no longer makes sense to be within the district. So maybe a specific district was originally 50 properties, and it suddenly becomes 20 properties, or whatever it may be. You know, that's typically how it's done, based on that rationale of what still retains its character and what doesn't. But again, that's kind of at the discretion of that study committee and council at the end of the day as to what those boundaries are and why those boundaries are decided, and what the status of the properties they're in are decided. You know, again, the important thing, regardless of which path that potentially takes, if that were to be a path, is following that process in state law, because, you know, again, you want to make sure that the decisions are legally defensible and consistent across the entire city. Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I think that's where the risk that we take is just with some of the things that have been approved. And then if something is denied, someone can come back to the city and say, well, you approved Delora for vinyl siding and vinyl windows, but why did you tell me I couldn't do it? You know, and that's
That's what we've had in the past.
The survey would assist in designating the
Right.
reasons why, because your home is more historically significant than Dolores' house. So you have to, you know, you're expected to be among these standards, as opposed to the cabin that used to be the servants' quarters of, you know, whatever. So the survey is I think, very important in not only possibly moving or adjusting the outlines, but definitely important in rating the significance of the homes contributing or non-contributing.
So I have some investigative questions real quick. Alan, when you do a survey, not you personally, but when someone does a survey, and let's say we're gonna reclassify the homes, who does that work? To be compliant with PA
The
169?
committee, it just says you have to have a committee. It doesn't say we have to hire anybody.
Correct, so there's no professional qualification associated with that. So again, it could be volunteers, it could be a consultant that's doing the work at the end of the day. But yeah, PA 169 does not have a directive as to who has to do that, yeah.
So to me, that's kind of good, because, you know, Jason, the house you pointed out, my previous boss, who has a master's in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania, looks at that kind of structure and says, most definitely, that's the structure that has to be preserved. You have to find a way to windows, wood siding, you know, foundations that are exposed that might be leaking. He was completely against air's basement systems coming in and waterproofing basements and throwing thin concrete around Waverly stone foundations. A humongous uproar. So when you go in and you reevaluate the homes, if it's a local committee, then you know what you want as a community and you'll be able to do it. But if there was some kind of click where you had to have a registered architect do it for you, you might not get the result you're looking for. But if it's a local committee that can do that, which Jason, I remember you sitting in not my office, but in the small conference room, and we loaded all the pictures for you and you went through picture by picture. You know, that's a process, I think, that can be done. And going out and looking at the properties, you know, when spring gets here and it's a little more warm, more comfortable to be outside. So I just wanted to verify that we don't have to hire, you know, an architect. Because what's historic to someone in looking, is it exactly historic to someone else? Or what is run down and, oh my gosh, they need vinyl siding, might be someone else. Oh no, you have to preserve everything on this. So that's why I was asked that question.
So, just so I'm clear, if we were to shrink the districts, would that remove their national registration? I haven't heard the answer to that.
So
But we-
not in and of itself. So theoretically, the boundaries for a local district and a national register district should match, in theory, because they're based on the same framework, if you will, about how you look at historic significance. And National Register boundaries can change over time too, you know, just kind of as a matter of statement. You know, they can change as things come down or change, whatever. So generally speaking, because they're built on the same framework, they should match at the end of the day. That's best practice because it keeps things consistent. That said, a change in local designation, whether that's removing their designation altogether or changing their status, does not automatically then trigger a change on the National Register side. They're entirely separate programs that are not related one to the other than they use the same framework, but one has no practical implications on the other. We administer on behalf of the National Park Service the National Register program through our office. So when people are getting properties listed or removals or what have you, all of that functions through us. We don't, just as a matter of capacity more than anything else, you know, we're not going out across the state and policing those. We're not going and saying, oh, well, this property's been so changed, it no longer makes sense for National Register designation or what have you. Generally, changes to National Register status come as a result of a petition of a property owner. Maybe it's been changed, or more commonly, just because the property no longer exists. It's been demolished. Because National Register status does not have any protections associated with it. It's just an honorary thing, so it doesn't prevent anybody from changing or demolishing their property. So that's typically when we see changes to National Register status is when they've been demolished or, yeah, maybe a historic district has been so substantially changed by infill construction over time. But one does not automatically lead to the other. There would have to be some sort of initiation of that step.
So that's just kind of like, because if we redraw it, then it doesn't affect necessarily the state tax credit. Not that that's so significant because there's only X amount of dollars per year and it's a competitive process to get those dollars, from what I was reading on the application and how that all works. But it is nice that it's at least there if we're going to have them in a district where we're requiring them to do certain things to maintain at a higher level than other people in the city, you know, but I'm for if we want to do a survey or shrink down the districts. I just think they're too big and cumbersome and really have a lot of things in them that really aren't historically significant or probably drawn way too broad. You go up through like the Marshall neighborhood and you look at some of the houses, you go, that's in the district, why is that one? And there's other places in the city technically that you could say, why isn't that in the district? But I think it's time to look at that as one of the paths forward. Otherwise, just go into the administrative side. We just gotta have a discussion on what do we want these historic districts to do for the city, and what does the community want them to do for the city? What, you know, how do we want them to move forward? I wasn't, you know, upset at the recommendations that they had. I was fine with a lot of them, but if we're gonna put extra requirements on a property owner, I wanna make sure they have as much benefits from that as well.
There was a community outreach and involvement element to the recommendation, and we haven't heard much discussion on that yet.
I'm sorry, before we get to that, I'm sorry, just,
Yeah.
if we're all still on board of moving forward with HGC, changing boundaries, properties, whatever that looks at, I want everyone in full transparency to understand that there's consequences sometimes for people who choose not to come before the HDC. I'm just guessing, but I'm willing to bet that 80% of the modifications that happened to the homes in this last year since I've been on the board never came to the HDC. That being said, we write a letter. I've already voiced my concern about us writing a letter to have somebody got a hand slapped. There needs to be backing behind us to you guys to stand up and say, yeah, HEC is in control of that. And so there's a letter written, hey, come before the HTC, whether the project's finished, in the middle of it, beginning, whatever, come before the HTC. Obviously, we've approved a lot of things. It's probably not something that we're gonna say no to, as long as it's aesthetically appealing and fine. But now if we decrease the properties that we care about, and let's say somebody does buy the Lano Inn who says, I love it, but I really wanna make it a little more energy efficient, so I'm gonna put some better windows in my house. And they're not wood windows. They might go with, you know, aluminum clad wood windows or something like that, which, whatever, it's a little bit different. We say no, because we have already determined we want to preserve this the way it is, and they do it anyway. Are we prepared for what I call our nuclear reaction, which would be more or less hiring a contractor and us forcing ourselves into their home to rip out those windows and put them back in and tack it onto their tax bill? I mean, that's a crazy worst case scenario.
It's realistic.
But at some point, somebody's gonna say no. To maybe not to, you know, windows at the Lano Inn. It's just a hypothetical there. But that's possible. And can if I say no, and it goes to this legal action of some sort, I'm sure they're coming to you guys, and they're gonna say, what the deuce, I'm just trying to make my house better.
And that has been my problem with HDC since I have lived in Allegan. We have these 5, 7, 9 people, however big, large our committee has always been, telling someone that they can't do something, but someone else comes and they let them do it. There's been no, so in order to do what you're saying, there has to be some type of guidelines. I know a lady who wanted to put up a picket fence and it was shot down. She went out in her yard, and across the street the next day, a guy's putting up a picket fence. because he didn't come to HDC and get it approved. But she got shot down when she had her drawings right there. That's what we can't keep continuing to do in the HDC committee.
Sure. Part of that is just simply simple ordinance enforcement. Our ordinance enforcement is our police, who honestly have better things to do than drive around everybody and look at their house windows and fence and see if it's new or. I mean honestly, I would prefer them to be doing something different than that. But if you see where I'm coming from with this, like it's I want to make this community great. I'd love to have a great HTC, but if we just let people keep doing what they're doing, then what is the point at this point?
And for me, if it's on the books, the ordinance is on the books, that they need to come before, then we need to enforce that while it's there. I mean, that's the,
And
if
that's
we're not
kind
gonna
of-
enforce it, then we get rid of the ordinance, and if we wanna start from scratch, we start from scratch. I mean, this is,
And this might be something.
What came up last year?
This might, this is something I've been I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, sure you did.
But this is something I've been battling, for about for almost a year. I mean, a year and a half, so I've been on this, and, since the whole one guy that literally redid his entire house. And this isn't, I'm not looking for an answer from you guys, but this is something I think you guys need to think about is, are we willing to spend more or less, it's not taxpayer money, but it is until that money's thrown on their tax bill, battling that person possibly in court, and then hiring somebody to go in and do something like that.
I'm personally not with the district size where they're at. That's, I think one of the main issues is we have a lot of these structures like the one you're talking about where you're like, well, that place wasn't in great shape and they're improving it. And that's where also we go, it was a place really that historic. And a lot of people kind of looked at it and go, oh, not really. So that's why I don't like the districts as large as they are, because you're not willing to enforce it because you have all these really not contributing structures and you're just like, why do we have this district so large? And then that makes us not really want to enforce it that way, to go through the court, to go through the, we're gonna hire a contractor to do the remediations and all of that. Because, yeah, we have that power in there, but when it's such a big district with so many properties in it that you're like, these aren't really significant, I'm not willing to go that route with that. Now, if we had a much more restricted district, that really, we said, these are the structures that are historically significant that we want to preserve as a community. And part of the reason we put this in was because of the courthouse, like we said. We didn't want to lose all the historic buildings in town, or we just say, so, but then they made it so large, it's like, it's made it very cumbersome, I think, for us to run it.
Okay, but I think what I'm hearing is that hypothetically, we do the new survey, we have all the distinctions and all the designations, if you will, that then you would be more comfortable with the enforcement side of things, should we ever have to get to that point. I think to Jason's point is, what does that enforcement look like? What are we supposed to expect to be able to do or not do? Because what we've tried to do in this study is to convert it from an enforcing to, what did we call it, voluntary compliance.
And this now leads into what Dave was talking about.
So, I guess, I think Jason's still trying to lean on, and all of us, trying to understand, if we get pushed to that envelope as a committee to enforce this compliance, what is that enforcement? Is the council ready to back that up? Knowing that in this new survey, we're gonna have all that information and new ordinance. So it's not as, theoretically, it will not be as broad and generic as a 40-year-old survey. Hope I made sense.
what did the commission feel was the general consensus of the public? I mean, I was at one of the meetings, I know what I took away from it, but I'm just wondering what your general
Okay.
thoughts were.
Based on our understanding, majority of the public that owns a historic home, they bought it because they appreciate the character and the historic significance of it. And they are inclined to preserve it to the best that they can. They do not agree with the commission telling them how they have to do that, regardless of the financial concerns. That was the main thing.
They don't, yeah, they're not a fan. I mean, it's what, I think, were you gonna say something?
Just use the mic, please. Thank you.
Eddie was getting to it.
It is being
Sorry.
recorded. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, they weren't a fan. I think, like Eddie said, people like their homes. They bought because you buy a house because you like what you see on it, and they say they want to preserve what they bought the home for, and they're not, in many people's terms, they're not going to screw it up.
There were a few people who really felt very passionate about having a historic district commission and thought that that was really important for our community. But then, when they were asked if they would have restored their properties to the, historic appropriateness, with or without the Historic District Commission, they said yes.
So are we holding on to something that the community isn't even invested in?
And that's,
Again, I'll go to, do we have a downtown historic district?
and that's kind of where I'm at, like, we can resize it, but are we gonna be able to enforce it? That's my biggest thing, because people are gonna do what they wanna do. And the majority don't want the historic district to enforce anything. It's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, I'm sitting on the board because I cared about it enough to join it. But being on this side of it and seeing what happens out there, it's disheartening because, I mean, I can't police it by myself, nor, I mean, is it necessarily beneficial for me to police, try to police it, because ultimately there's nothing gonna happen to it. And people, I don't think, are maliciously destroying their properties when they're putting in new windows or new siding on their home. Like Eddie said, a lot of them are like, I'm gonna take care of it the best that I can take care of it, because it's their home. They wanna come back to it every single night. They're not gonna let it just rot into the ground. Some might.
They bought it because they like it.
But there's other ordinances in place if they, what's it called?
Or demolition?
Demolition by neglect.
Yes, demolition by neglect. There are other ordinances that can prevent that. I don't know if that's the opinion that you took from the meeting that you were at, but both meetings were very similar. There was really only one property owner there's two property owners of the same property that were there, who felt adamant to keep the historic district.
What I took from it was that people are gonna do what they can afford to do.
And it's not to say that, we still can't have a historic district, and it's, like you said, certain properties in this, more downtown district, the Griswold, the library, those types of places, we can still have that, and they still maintain that CLG status. But for the residential aspect of it, there's not a ton of support out there.
Very little support.
And that's why I say, like, I bet 80-some% of people don't even care to even think about coming to the HTC.
Yeah, honestly, we have very little support from the public, We have very little support from our own commissioners. I mean, we can't get people to even show up, much less we can't recruit anyone new. Nobody wants this job.
Trust me, I've tried. I've asked everybody.
And I will be honest, we have not 100% felt supported by council either. We have been dealing with feelings of a lack of support for quite some time.
Well, what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now? We voted to disband by vote of the commission
I mean, that was the
to
recommendation
disband the,
Yep.
to disband the historic district.
Well, our recommendation was to investigate how that would work.
I wonder if a more,
No, it was,
1 year ago from November was,
The vote was in October.
it was when
it was 1 year ago.
Mayor Perigo
A
was,
year and 3 months, whatever.
Rachel brought it up. at our meeting.
Right.
it was Rachel, and it was Mayor Perigo's last meeting, if I remember right, before
It was
the new
Rachel,
council.
because she was on the HDC.
GC. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a good opportunity here to talk about the element in the recommendation of community engagement and involvement. Like, there's a real recognition that the current state is not something anybody wants, but I think we had talked about potential for the future and maybe even value in doing that.
Yeah, and that's where what we had talked about with voluntary compliance comes in, emboldening our public or the residents of our historic districts enough and creating a sense of pride that's strong enough where people choose to do the right thing on their own without us having to tell them. And I do see that there's real work to be done with that. Although while we have gone through this process and since after, it's clear that we don't need a commission to do that work. That work can be done through the Allegan Historical Society or other, historic groups. So if we're gonna maintain an HDC just for that, I don't know if that's quite the right answer. But if we do have some sort of HDC, if we decide to go the route of, shrinking the districts or doing a new survey of them, that is going to be key to getting us to work in harmony with the public, is public outreach. Holding things like the tuck pointing seminar that was done here, doing other events, having presences at our, July through Jubilee or things like that, doing walking tours. There's so many ideas that we can do to bring the public in to who we are as a commission and, kind of what we stand for. That would be really, I think we all believe that would be integral to our success if we were to go forward.
So if we have 87% of construction going on in the city that is not coming through the HDC, and it sounds like a majority, at least of the people who were willing to show up to the meeting saying that they don't really want the HDC, and the ones who say they do want the HDC said they were gonna do it the way, they were gonna do it right even without the HDC, then what are we doing? It seems like we're doing, we're jumping through a whole lot of hoops for something that most of the city doesn't care about. I mean, we want the aesthetic, and maybe we can rewrite an ordinance for that, but we can't get people to serve on it. We have people who, the citizens, residents who don't seem to care about it, so why are we forcing this?
I wonder if that's a good opportunity to just kind of get input from Alan on why do communities want HDCs?
I think it would be hard to have like one answer for every community because I think every community goes into it a little bit differently. Quite frankly, a lot of the historic district commissions and local historic districts in the state, they were established in the 80s, 90s, a lot of them. We do have new historic districts that are established every year. We have a dozen or so some in new communities entirely, some in existing communities that have commissions already and they're just adding to their slate. Their primary reason for the establishment of local historic districts is because it is the one mechanism that allows for managing change in an area, quite frankly. That's the reason. There's National Register designation for historic properties, but that's an honorary thing only, so that recognizes the importance of place. But some communities, for, aesthetics, public benefit, do find value in saying, hey, this is an important area in our community or areas in our community, and we recognize there is value to maintaining the rhythm of the houses along the street and pattern of setbacks and materials and things like that. Just as much as a property maintenance code protects the public value of properties and what they experience in a community, or just as a zoning ordinance makes sure that you don't put up a liquor store next to a daycare. It's all those things that contribute to how we function in our communities, and we value that there are certain things that are good for the public to be around and experience. And it's that protective value that local historic districts provide is really the primary reason that people do that. The reality is that, and as you guys have talked about, sometimes that value perception shifts in a community. That's the reality. What may have made sense or have been a value 20, 30, 40 years ago may no longer be where a community is. It does happen, and that's, regardless of where you all come out in the conversation. I would not, as much as I would not, like to have to lose Allegan as a CLG in the program. You guys have been in since the 90s. The reality is you need to do what makes sense for you guys at the end of the day. It would not be of benefit to you all to do something for the sake of maintaining that status if it's not in the interest of the community. That's the reality I'm here to support you. The program's there to support you guys if you want it, but if you all don't feel that is where you're at, then you all need to do what is right for you all. And that is kind of a value discussion, based on what you all are getting from local historic districts or what you could get from local historic districts, should they be managed in a way that was more appropriate and kind of to scale of what you guys are thinking. But that's an entirely local decision at the end of the day, for council, for the HDC. I think there's a lot of relevance in the conversation about backing and enforcement, because that's the reality is that you don't want to do all these things, and you don't want to put in the time, the resources, manpower to end up in the same place, a year down the road. And I get that. I used to work in local government. I've sat on boards and commissions. There's a limit to capacity and resources at the end of the day. So it's an important decision regardless of where you fall in that argument in terms of what that value is in Allegan specifically for historic districts. And again, should you guys decide that you do want to continue these conversations and figure out what they could look like, let's talk, let's see where we can get. But at the same time, if you guys do want to look at another pathway or just say, we're done with this, that is your purview. There are, it would not maintain CLG status specifically. And again, I wouldn't want you to do that just for the sake of having that on the books if you don't feel it's a benefit. There are other things that can be explored, like conservation district ordinances, which are worried more so about kind of major changes, so things like additions to a building or new construction or demolition, but it doesn't look at materials at all, essentially. That is something that could be passed under your own local zoning ordinance, not tied to historic preservation considerations specifically. There are some communities that have toyed with that idea in Michigan. None of them have actually implemented it. The city of Kalamazoo, for example, they have the authority to establish neighborhood conservation districts on the books, but they have never exercised that power. The city of Detroit did a study 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, on kind of the differences between conservation districts and local historic districts and the pros and cons to both of those. I'd be happy to pass that along if, based on kind of where the conversation is going, if that may be something that's of interest to look at and see what the pros and cons are of that, particularly if, again, you guys do have these places that, CLG EPA 169 aside, say, hey, we have these 5, 10 places, whatever, that we do want to protect, maybe here's a different framework for doing that. But again, it's a value-based conversation. It's just, that's for you guys to decide what's important to you, what the capacity, what the interest and desire is at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the National Historic Registry? Does that offer any type of restrictions or protections on those properties?
No, so the National Register is honorary only. So a property could theoretically be listed on the National Register one day, A new property owner could buy it and they could demolish it the next day.
Okay,
There's
so
no
there's
limitation
nothing.
whatsoever.
All right.
Yeah, the only limitations would happen if they were applying for, like, the tax credit we, talked about earlier. Obviously, there's some specifics that go along with that, or grant funding, but, property owners are free to do what they want with
But a
natural.
conservation district may allow us to have control over at least demolition, major construction.
Correct,
so-
yeah, so conservation districts generally, and there are some states that use them widely, generally just look at infill, additions, and demolition, kind of those major, neighborhood level changes, if you will, not so much the material changes and things like that. So, again.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, because I think it bears mentioning, that we've been going through our master planning for the last several years, and infilling has been of huge discussion, and allowing accessory dwelling units. So if that master plan is approved and our zoning ordinances are changed to align with that, our neighborhoods are going to change. The entire feel and look of those are going to change if that occurs. So just something else to think about.
So, we really haven't given HDC any direction, which is kind of why we're here.
So, what about taking a straw poll of council and just seeing where people are at?
That's fine, that's fine.
Start again.
You want to do it on paper?
We just, do
Or-
we need to do it on paper? Say it loud, say it proud.
I can wipe egg off of my house. Charles had something to say.
Yeah, I seen him waving. Okay, go ahead and step up to the podium, Chuck, and say your name and your address.
Charles Tripp, 419 Hastings Street. I just want to say one thing. I don't think you should be getting into percentages. This many people are against it, this many people are for it. About a year ago, you had a meeting here on the HDC. This room was full of about 80 people speaking to you guys, and 98% of them spoke in favor of keeping the HDC districts. You had a gentleman come here, first impressions of Allegan, and he spoke, would you come back to Allegan on a second visit? And he spoke intensely about how nice it was that Allegan had an HDC district, and that draws people to small towns. It brings in tourism. People spend money downtown. So you have to take this into consideration. And on the side room at the Grizzle Auditorium, they had these big boards you could write on. I went in there after the meeting, and every board had references to HDC districts make Allegan. HDC districts bring in tourism. HDC districts brings in commerce to our merchants downtown. And I don't hear this study committee over here taking any of this into consideration. It's all about the two meetings they had with the public. I think the public has already spoken earlier before they had their two meetings. And so all I ask you is take all this into consideration before you make your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, Dave, I guess we'll start with you. Where do you think we need to go?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for reforms, and some of those can be really impactful quickly, and some of them will take longer and a commitment. But I think it's worth looking at these reforms and digging into what would be feasible. I think we should commit to that.
Thank you. Laurel?
I was really in favor of the final recommendation that the study group came forward with, or the HDC as a whole came forward after the study had taken place. I was concerned when we got the note from SHPO stating that we wouldn't, qualify anymore. I'll be really honest, I would probably be in favor of eliminating the ordinance at this point, and then if it's something that we wanted to do, then we could start anew and look at creating a specific new district or something like that. I mean, that's my personal opinion at this point.
Thank you. Peter, where do you think we're at?
I could be for either like, just fully removal and look at it again, or right-sizing the districts. I'm not too keen on how big they are, and it just makes it really cumbersome. And if we want to actually say what we want to historically preserve, that's something that as a community we should do. And if we're going to do that, then we should actually use our authorities. And if we're not willing to use those authorities under our code, we shouldn't probably have them if we're not actually going to enforce it. Kind of where I'm at.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Mike, you haven't said much tonight. What are your feelings since you are part of the HDC now?
I think reforming the way that we do things is really the key to it. I'm hung up on the enforcement part of it, that so many are going ahead with it. So is this work being done without permits? Because I understand that PCI would cross-reference applications for permits.
Permits-
Is it in a historic committee and then not?
You don't need a permit to replace siding on your house. You don't need a permit to replace the window. You don't even need a permit to downsize your window size. You do need a permit to blow your window out and go bigger if you want to go bigger. You don't need a permit to do a lot of things to your home that isn't structural to your home. And really, if it's getting to that structural point, it's going to most likely zoning at that point also, beyond just the Historic District Commission.
Okay.
So they can do it without permission at that point.
Okay. And then I'd reforming the way that we do things would be important, but I do believe that code enforcement is the key to success in any of this.
Thank you, Mike. Roger?
So I am in agreement with Delora. I said at the beginning, I was in favor of the final recommendation. If we need to tweak that, I'm okay with that, but if we said maybe we should just wipe the slate clean and start from the beginning, I don't know that we have the energy for that. But that might be a place to start to totally redo our districts and get rid of 400 of the 466 properties and really slash that down to what is actually historically significant in our city, and then allowing people to do with their homes what they can do, and keep. Allegan has an aesthetic to it that we love, but as Dolores said, we have zoning ordinances that are going to change, and things there's going to be some changes made, and so is this just another step in that? So that's where I am.
Okay, thanks, Raj. I have really mixed feelings about it. I know that we have some very historic structures within the city. But I don't know who is, I liked your recommendation as well. My problem is who is any of us to say, it's okay, your home's not historic, go ahead. But Stacy may think a lot of her home being in the historic district, and she wants to keep it like it is, and she doesn't want the change. So now you've come and said, your house really isn't a historic figure in the city, so it don't matter.
We're not telling her she has to change it.
But are we taking her house out of the historic district?
It would still be on the national register, I guess, at one level, but.
Yeah, and she's still perfectly able, I mean, as much as she can afford, to keep her house historic
Like it
if she
is.
wants to. We're not saying that you have to change
Take
it.
it. And I agree, there's way too many houses in the historic district. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
So it's a big project, and I'm kind of like you. It's, does anybody really have the energy to start and rewrite the ordinance, to redo the districts, to name the housings in the districts, you know? Does anybody, I mean, we have a committee and there's 3 of them here tonight.
Yeah.
You know, and one of them mentioned, I think it was Eddie, said, we can't give volunteers, you know, it's.
Can I say something or no? Is
Sure.
It's not appropriate at this time.
No,
I don't know
go
if this
ahead.
is only you discussion. I was here for that meeting, where everyone was here and voiced their concerns and about keeping the historic district. Many of them are neighbors, of mine, who aren't necessarily in the historic district. And afterwards, I approached them. I said, we need, at that point, it was 2 new members to the board. And they said, I don't got time for that. There's a lot of people who I think love the historic district. Even the 2 meetings that we had, people said, we don't mind the historic district. We're happy that we're in the historic district. I just don't want you to tell me what I can and can't do with my home.
Correct.
For me, it's just, there's what the community doesn't want to lose, that historic district, but they don't necessarily want to help the historic district. That's just how I have taken things. Because I've asked for help from several people, not you guys or anything, but I'm saying outside, you know, hey, I saw you pro historic district, and come help historic district, and nobody really wants to volunteer.
I think that's the crux of it, really, is that everyone loves the feel and having some of these beautiful homes and having a mechanism to protect them. But it's actually doing the work and following through with all of it. That's the problem.
So do we start with writing a new ordinance?
I know when we discussed this the last time was to leave in a demolition part of it and all this back and forth on it. Because currently, yeah, if we want to maintain the historic district, from my reading of the PA 169, we're supposed to have 7 members, not just our current 5, because we are now above 5,000 in population.
Yeah, we have 7, right? We have 7 positions. You have the 3 that are here tonight, Kristen Stein, who is ill, so she couldn't make it, that's 4. Councilmember Zeter's 5, and then we have 2 vacant positions.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
what I'm
gives
saying, is
7.
we have currently 2 vacant, and we're having a hard time even filling those 2.
Did Alan resign?
Alan's term expired
Oh, it did.
at the end of 2022, and Alan has not responded to an email or voicemail from the city
He doesn't want to be on it.
hall for the past 6 months.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder, thank you. I wonder if part of our issue with getting members onto this committee has a lot to do, in my opinion, I think it probably has a lot to do with the reputation that the committee has developed before us 3 amazing, wonderful people came on board. But because I do live in a historic district, and I had no idea what that meant. So part of our proposal is that public relation, that promotion, if you will. And I think that might, when there's excitement, people join in. So I think the negativity that was accompanied to the reputation of the Historic District Commission, I think, in my opinion, has caused this barrier to have participation. I would venture to say to, or ask to Alan over there, Mr. Shippo, sorry, I forgot your last name. What is the repercussions of not having a full 7-member board from your perspective?
So, yeah, the challenge becomes, under PA 169, vacancies are supposed to be filled within 60 days, or under state law. I mean, the reality is not every community hits that because, I mean, you're volunteers at the end of the day. You can't, as you guys have discovered, you can't force somebody to be on the commission. You know, you can try and try and try, but, so, you know, that's not always a perfect standard that every community hits. That's what it says on the books, though, is to, you know, have that 60-day appointment of vacancies. The challenge becomes, of course, if you don't have quorum for your meetings, then that's where the real strangle point is, because then if you've got property owners coming to you to have their, you know, their applications reviewed and you don't have quorum to meet on it, then you can't do it, and then technically if you don't make a decision on it within 60 days, then it's automatically approved, and it's kind of this domino effect. So that's the real reason to maintain that full slate to the extent that you can. And again, every community struggles with that in some regard, but that's the real challenge that lies within. If it becomes a prolonged thing, particularly if there's a lot of work happening that comes for review, it can be problematic for that review period, so to speak.
Really quick before we further discussion, this question is for Joel or Michaela. Do we have any applications for this upcoming meeting?
Yes, so
do.
for your first meeting in February, you have the owner of 118 Brady, One Enterprises. They would like to remove the lower level, all that T111 siding. By lower level, I mean the first floor level, and install what we call typically architectural storefront glass windows and vertical steel siding, similar to what Tantric was approved with.
This will be our first meeting with an application in 6 months. 5?
It's been several meetings. I'm not gonna be able to put a number of that, but several meetings.
I think it's about 6 months. Okay, thank you.
You haven't had applications in 5 or 6 months?
And work has been done.
All right, so council's got to come up with some direction here. So,
So in the spirit of moving things along and just kind of forcing the issue, I would make a motion to accept the HDC's final recommendation from November 7th of 2022.
Support?
it has been moved and supported. All in favor, please signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Is there any value in establishing an expectation for updates on this? I know there's a lot of concern about being able to deliver, and we'll probably want to make sure that we're getting progress on these things.
Through the steps, steps 1 and 2. Steps 1 and 2.
Yeah, the final recommendation, you know, we talked earlier about those being important concepts, and there's a lot of nuance and detail, and Alan had offered support in helping work through options, and, you know, I heard mention earlier of revisions to the ordinance that may or may not be necessary to accomplish important goals in this. So I don't know that I'd want to say at this time, I don't know if I could commit to like, okay, this is A, B, C, and D of these things need to get done unless we've got some operational plan in place with the staff and or in the HDC, but maybe that's even the next step is, all right, we've got these concepts we're all in support of. How do we start to execute on these and come back with an operational plan that then we can hold accountability for both the committee and staff?
Well, I think like any of our committees, we have the liaison between council and HDC. HDC can come to any of our council meetings and let us know where they're at. You know, you're gonna have to have a meeting to get your ducks, like how you want them, you know, what your plan is. And just keep in communication, you know, with what's happening. At some point, then we may have to discuss doing something with the ordinance or how how it's gonna be enforced.
So is council saying you want us to move ahead as our recommendation is written?
That was the motion we just voted on, yep.
So then that does become in conflict with what you want, which would then negate our CLG.
So that, yeah, I mean, that's kind of that nuance, then where that discussion point, you know, needs to happen is, particularly on that point one, as we talked about later, how that is done within kind of the framework of operations and the ordinance. You know, there are ways to address different categories of projects as we discussed, and I won't rehash all of that, and that's an option that is still within the parameters. But if it becomes something else, then yeah, I think there would have to be a discussion, and that's something that could happen is, you know, as that conversation continues, you could say, you know, here is where we're going very specifically with this, or here are two paths we could potentially take as it relates to that point one. And we could say, well, yes, that would comply or not comply, but yeah, I mean, there could be pathways within there that wouldn't make sense at the end of the day. But if if it's strictly on paper as saying, we're gonna completely remove all this from the ordinance, that does become problematic.
So I'm not trying to, I just wanna make sure I'm 100% clear with this. This is that meeting to determine if this is the way we wanna go or not. And if you're saying yes, he's saying no. So if we need to change one, this is where what do you want us to change on step one?
So if I'm understanding, it's because, like we discussed, do we want step one to just be, there's no application? Or do we want step one to be, yeah, there's an application, but it's just gone through administratively, and that part one of their recommendations?
But if it's going through administratively, and we're just approving everything administratively, that still comes back to SHPO not wanting everything. We can't just blanket statement, yes.
Is that where the major and minor?
Correct, that's where the different, and that would be, sorry.
So
go
what,
ahead. Yes.
I'm just trying, I'm sorry, Alan, I'm not trying to step on you. So that's why we're coming to you. And that's why I think Alan's here, is to make sure we're on the right path of whichever way we want to go. So I guess I'm putting this back. I know we just passed something and said go with it. But Alan said that we then need to talk about this again, but that's what this meeting was to do. So if we're gonna blanket statement yes to everything, then CLG's out.
Right.
That's where, wait a second, that's where we're supposed to go and figure out what our major categories and minor categories are.
No. No, they've said they 100% agree with this, move forward, which means that, which then goes to, no.
Nothing about here.
Nothing about that. We don't have that on there. They didn't approve that.
Exactly. Okay,
No.
I see what you're saying now. So amend the motion.
This was the recommendation, and
But the recommendation then eliminates CLG.
so recommendation more or less will then get us another letter from you, more or less this exact same letter again. If we move ahead with this, we get this again.
Well, I think the point was that it's how we nuance our enforcement of section 1. Is that what I heard?
So then, but then we need to amend this top part here. Because we're saying projects that involve repairing, replacing exterior features will not need to go through an application process. So if we have an issue with that, now's the time for us to say, hey, we need to step back, we want to keep the CLG.
That's kind of what the PA 169, you have to have that, any exterior work has to have approval. And whether it's administrative approval, where they come up with the standards and say, these are the things that just get administrative approved, which currently does happen for things that are direct replacement, and PCI does do that on time to time already. It's just, are we just widening that? Or are we eliminating that for all those things that don't require a building permit, because then we're not gonna be following PA 169, which could eliminate our CLG capabilities.
My concern with this is it feels like we're just gonna get back into where we've been.
What,
And what's the whole
Precisely.
point?
why can't we just go back to an HDC meeting where we invite the CLG representative and say, okay, here's our goals. We want to loosen our restrictions here. We don't want to be in the business of saying you can and can't side these things. We want, whether it's administrative approval, whatever it takes to let the community know these things are okay, this is what our values are. Work through that. Yeah, this is a good recommendation. This is what council is saying. We got your back on this. If that process of how we come down to this, if you find yourself through that conversation with CLG going, oh, we can't make ends meet here and we're done with CLG status, sure, we got your back on that. But just take some time and work through those details of how that can play out.
I think for me, that's a sticking point, because the community itself doesn't want to be regulated. Right. It's been shown through the meetings, it's been shown through conversations I had with people in the community, it's been shown by this board, because we can't get 7 people in a city of
5,222.
5,222
Thank you, Parker and
to show
Michaela.
up once a month to say, I want to make this community better. So that's why we have it in there. They don't need to go through an application, because that is what the community wants. That is what we've heard. That's what we've been more or less kind of told.
Council, I believe, I know I'm aware of the risk. I understand what Alan has said tonight. I hear what you guys are saying. I voted in favor of this recommendation, so I got your back. Go and work on this. We don't need to get through all the details right now.
Do you guys want to work on this?
I'm afraid of wasting people's time here.
I mean,
Alan, I'm afraid of wasting your time. I'm sure you love the drive from Lansing in the middle of the night in the winter time here. But I mean, if that's a sticking point for me, and if that is, I'm not speaking for anybody else here. If that's a sticking point, ends up being a sticking point for the commission, is that something that can be overcome with the CLG? Kind of plain and simple, like, is that?
Yeah, if it is like exactly as is written, that these things don't go through the process, then yeah, that's not compliant with PA 169, which would then mean that CLG status would not be eligible at that point. So there are ways to address that, potentially, if you still want them to go through the process, but in a more minimalistic way. But if it's, kind of out as paper, yeah, we just don't even want to have to worry about these things because it's not of importance, so to speak, anymore. That does invalidate the ordinance at that point.
I mean, the application process was brought up many times in the meeting. It's cumbersome. It's literally go to the city's website, print off something. Most people don't have a printer in their house. They got to fill it out by hand. They then have to fax it or scan it and email it to PCI with quotes, with pictures, with all these other things. I mean, it was cumbersome for a lot of people, and a lot of people just said, forget it. I'm just going to do it, which has happened over and over. I mean, I'll go back, Dave, and talk about this. I'm just not trying to waste everybody's time.
Joel, HDC used to be a paid committee. What happened?
they received, I believe, several years ago, like early 2000s, like $10 a meeting. That does not cover a person's time for reviewing the application or anything like that. The other thing, Alan, real quick, I just want clarification on, if our ordinance is not compatible with PA 169, then the city does not have the protections to enforce any of our preservation ordinances, which PA 169 gives the city the authority to do. Do we run afoul in that area?
Correct, you would not have the protections under PA 169, so at that point, it would just be any protections under your zoning ordinance that may be in power. But yeah, protections like appeals processes, violations under PA 169, all that goes
Yeah.
out the window.
If we can't enforce our application process, what are we doing? And to quote you, Roger, what are we doing?
Are you rescinding your recommendation?
No, I mean, if this is the way you wanna go, that's fine, I'll take it up, but I just,
That,
it's fine. I
That
mean,
becomes
the process just seems to be leading to a dead end at this point.
yeah,
That's all I'm trying to say, is we just approved something.
and-
We just got told, yes, I love it, maybe not in those terms,
Not those words.
but
that does
But if we-
become such a major thing for me, that if we're gonna have something in the end that we can't enforce, and if we do try to enforce, we don't have the protection of the state law, why are we going down this path?
Right, and I think when we initially created our recommendation, we were unaware of what sort of nuanced situations we would be faced with when it comes to CLG status and enforcement and that sort of thing. And so now that we've had time to obviously talk to Alan and things, I mean, things have been brought to light. And like you said, I think it just really shows that we're gonna be
'cause this
not much different than we are today.
this ultimately comes back to, if we can't streamline this application or lack of application process, people still are not gonna wanna come. I mean, like I said, 80-some-odd% probably don't even come to our board. Like I said, last 6 months, we haven't gotten any. Maybe two, maybe, there might have been one in September. I'm not positive on that, but most of them weren't. We just didn't have anything. And the ones that came, we're gonna do it right to no matter what, kind of thing. And for us to go back with our recommendation, to then more or less say, okay, we're gonna go back to an application process. We're gonna run it through PCI, which we already do. PCI does bless or not bless things. It's still gonna come before us. And I'm still, gonna say, that 103 River Street, I'm still gonna say they can put vinyl windows in, because that's gonna be an upgrade for that home. I wouldn't care if they put vinyl siding on that. It's gonna look better for this community. I don't think that's historic. And there's a lot like that, and there might be those few out there. And I'm not saying there's not. But as the community as a whole that voiced to us, and I get there was the meeting in last November, 2 Novembers ago, where people voiced in opposition of it, but those people haven't shown up to any one of these meetings that we've had public, asking them to come help us figure out what we want to do.
And that meeting did not account for all of the emails that council received from a lot of the communities saying they were
There
in
was,
favor of having it disbanded.
there was a couple, yeah.
And so that,
So I mean, if you want us to take this back, I just feel, and go back and say, all right, we're gonna put the final touches on this, I feel like we're still gonna run afoul with our CLG or the state if this is the direction you're telling us to go.
So that's kind of where I'm at. If I thought maybe we were thinking that we would have that application process still for number one, but it would just be streamlined, that it would just, they determine through this, these are the things that PCI can approve of, and it just, or if we're gonna go down this route and it's gonna remove CLG, it's gonna remove protections under the state, then why are we going down this route? I don't wanna start down that path just to have them work on something if they don't have at least a minimum framework to say, well, you're still gonna have to have an application process for all exterior work to stay compliant with PA 169. And if that application process, part of it in your recommendations was to update the website to make that application process more efficient, to do those type of things, and if that then is updated, allowing people to have a better relation with HDC to say, yeah, I know these things are gonna get approved because these are just usually administratively approved, I just submit my application. Is that where we're going with this? Do we want that process still? Because if we're saying we wanna eliminate that process, that's gonna might as well just eliminate the ordinance.
Well, that was my thought, as this is nothing against you all, because I sense your despair and I appreciate your hard work and your wanting to do something, but and I know there's been some changes since you made this recommendation, but like we just, after all your hard work, you came up with this recommendation, we approved it, and it's still not right. And I'm sitting here now thinking, maybe I should have made a motion to just go with the original HDC recommendation to just disband, because we're not any further ahead. As I'm listening to you talk, we just approved this thing that took you so long to put together, and we're no closer to solving this than we were before. So it seems pretty futile to me at this point.
And it seems for years we've had the same conversations over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been going on.
Well, Dolores said at least 2018.
Yeah.
And I'm sure before that.
Yeah.
There's always the option of the mayor requesting that something be put on the agenda, or two council members can request that something be put on an agenda. We had a ordinance that came before us last year. That's just an option, but
So,
but I'd really like to know how the HDC feel, like, how do you guys feel? Do you
yeah,
want
do you
to
guys
go
want
forward with this
to-
recommendation? I mean, Jason's face is saying no.
I joined this committee because I own an older home. Not sure if it's historic significance at this point. I think it's pretty darn significant, but I joined this committee because I was proud to learn that I'm in a historic district, okay? Unaware of what that actually meant. As we discovered, that's part of the communication issue throughout the community, okay? Do I want to go forward with this? I would love to go forward with this. And at the time this recommendation was written, the complication or scenario issue, whatever you want to call it, with the CLG was not brought to light as it was tonight, in my opinion and my understanding. I'm willing to take this back and say, okay, I understand now there has to be an application process for us to continue to, as a area to continue to qualify for the CLG standards. And what does that look like? Well, that's obviously something that we would have to work through. I believe that, I still believe that the historic district can have a positive impact in this area. My nervousness is in disbanding this commission, what would that do to the entire community as far as the historical homes and their significance or contributing factors to each historic district? So I'm willing to go forward, but if the, council votes to disband, then that's what the vote is.
so that's where I'm kind of at is, are we gonna, I could put a motion up of, are we gonna add an?
Peter, hold on just a second, would you please? Let's hear what the rest of them say, and then we'll make our comments. Thank you. Go ahead, Jason, where are you with this?
So I joined this board a year and a half ago, because I was frustrated with, one, equity of amongst, felt like some people got preferential treatment. Some people got yes, some people got no's. Not sure how that process looked like. I also joined this. That was because of the things in the past. But I joined it specifically because this board didn't have a quorum for over 2 months with my project. And I said, I will not let that happen to another person. Because this is just before the pandemic. I work in home improvement, and I know lead times and stuff like that, and sales that happen on certain things. And there are prices, people take advantage of sales that happen. Most of those sales don't go for 60-plus days. So I said, I don't want that to happen again. Eventually, there was a quorum, and I did get my stuff, whatever. But once joining, I wanted it to be fair for everybody. And I think I've been pretty fair with how I voted. I don't think I've destroyed the community in any way at this point. I think people, for the most part, that come before us are trying to do the right thing for their homes. With us or without us, they were trying to make a call based on how they felt that home looked, and they wanted to keep that look of that home. Because if they didn't like the look of the home, they would just, you would do more than just put new windows in kind of thing. You're going to do more than that. They wanted to preserve the look of that home some way. That being said, with us being up here, we can say yes and no to people all day long. That's not the issue. The process of people coming up to us, doing an application, not doing an application, whether it's PCI approving it or us approving it, that's not the issue to me. The issue comes into the enforcement aspect of it for me. Because I drive around here, I see something, I say something to Joel. We send a letter and we get a hand slapped for sending out a letter saying, hey, pause your project for a second, just come talk to us, tell us what you're doing at that point. Or we don't even see what's happening, and next thing you know, we got a brand new fence right here at the bottom of Water Tower Hill that was put up in a weekend, and now it's there. And do we go back over there? Do we fight that battle through, going to the person, telling them to take it down? This is all legal stuff. This is what the city's gonna have to pay for. Talking to them to take that down and put up something appropriate, or we hire a contractor to go chainsaw that down and put something else up, or just take it down, kind of thing. I think that would be far more detrimental to the community than any positive thing we could do. There's no coming back from it. The first time we have to do that, or enforce something like make somebody undo something, that will negate any positive movement that we could ever do and change or whatever with this commission. I'm happy to go either way, honestly. It's a struggle for me if we're saying yes to everything, because like I said, those people that come in here are doing it the way they should do it. I don't think I've ever voted no because everything, they're replacing the windows. It might be vinyl windows, but they're keeping the grid pattern. They might be replacing the siding, but they're keeping the aesthetics of what the old siding was. They're putting on a new roof, asphalt shingles to asphalt shingles. They have to come before us, for 3-tab to architectural, but it's still an asphalt shingle. For me, it's all the other things. Once one person gets away with it, then another person's gonna get away with it. And then we're back to the same boat of, well, my buddy over here on this street just put a fence up. He didn't go to the HDC, so I'm just gonna put a fence up and not go to the HDC, and it'll be all fine. I don't think there's anybody who can patrol the city and look at every property every day to make sure things are the same. Do you know what I mean? Or things aren't changing, or somebody didn't do a project on that. That's where I'm at. We're gonna be, I just feel like this is gonna ultimately be back in the same boat here. That's where I'm at. And then we're, same discussion.
I don't take back any of the work that we did on the study group. I think we did a lot of important work, very thorough work, very good work. And I think our recommendation at that point in time was very appropriate and aimed to solve a lot of the problems that we had. Since we've come up with this recommendation, like Stacy and Jason mentioned, you know, a lot of the things with CLG came to light. I did not know that it was CLG and our ordinance that gave us state power to enforce these things, with enforcement already being probably the worst part of this commission, in my mind. And then knowing that it's only going to be more difficult after this, start over. Start over. I think the community will benefit greatly from that. Honestly, I do. So, that's where I am.
Thank you, Eddie. Peter, go ahead. Now we'll have some discussion here on what, now that we know how they kind of feel,
So
more to add.
if we can't enforce it, because if they don't have an application process, you know, that's what we talked and approved was this as it was, and we didn't amend it, then what are we having them do? Because there's no enforcement capability. We can't take them to district court like we currently can. If somebody's in non-compliance, we can pull them into the judge. We're not, you know, if we're not in compliant with the state law and we can't use those authorities, what's the point? Unless if we want to say, make an application process to streamline a lot of the stuff, or are we saying we want these districts, because with the current, what we currently approve, we didn't say we're looking at resizing the districts or anything like that. It's the districts are the same size. We have no enforcement mechanism if we go this route with without an application. So that's where I'm going. I would put a motion to amend our prior motion to add an application process to number 1. And we can consider that and decide whether we want to continue on with this or if we want to not. So.
Does anybody have anything else to discuss?
Yes,
Joel, okay.
just real quick.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
So first, we can't amend a motion that's already been approved, but we can reconsider a motion. So the word would be reconsider. So you're on the right
Propose a motion
track.
that are our
Yep.
prior.
You're on the right track, so thank you for going down that path. It seems like there's still discussion that has to happen, in my opinion. From watching this happen, Al and I just had a small conversation. We never really addressed going through, kind of starting over, but looking at all the properties and doing a new analysis on what's contributing and what's not contributing. And if it's not contributing, you can write your ordinance to say, if it's a non-contributing building, these are the standards that, of which they can be approved, and they can be all approved administratively. So it could be as simple as coming down to City Hall, filling out the application, a quick look, you're good. And then if it's a contributing building, there's another, layer of review. It would be my recommendation, my advice right now, that you reconsider the original motion, so we're not beholden to that language that's a little tight right now. And then someone make a second motion directing staff in the HDC to work on a new process and come back, in consultation with the representatives from SHPO, and come back with, how we feel we should move forward. So there's a lot of good ideas in here, and there's probably some hybrid mixing, but I think we need to engage SHPO earlier on in the process of developing this stuff and not after the fact. So my recommendation is you reconsider this motion. Someone moves, someone supports. Do not vote yes if you don't want to go down with that one. Vote yes if you want to just accept it. But then the second motion is to direct staff in the HDC to work, come back with, a different recommendation in consultation with SHPO.
Does HDC want to do that?
Come up with a different recommendation? I can only speak for myself. No, I do not.
I mean, of two of the three that spoke just now, Eddie said, just wipe it all away and start over. And Jason, you were basically saying the process we have right now is futile, that we can't enforce it. So what I took away from both of you was
I think.
this is not a great,
Yeah, I don't think the community, I don't think the community as a whole, I get there are some people out there that want the HDC. I don't think the community as a whole would understand what the HDC is and would accept following whatever rules we set forward, because they don't follow them now. And all we would be doing would be creating we'd just be making the same thing again. If we have an application process, yes, it might be streamlined, but it's still an application process. They still have to be willing to walk through City Hall's doors and fill out that form, or they still have to be willing to go on to the city's website and do that. I think this is where we were at, because this is what months of mailers, months of emails, months of meetings that we had, several meetings that we had here, individual meetings that we had with people who lived in the historic district.
right?
This was the culmination of how they felt.
Yeah.
There are people outside the historic districts that I think value the historic district at a different level and don't understand what's happening inside the historic district with those historic homes and what that means to be in a historic district home.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to be obstructionist, and I'm fine if we want to reconsider this motion, but it sounds like we're putting a lot of energy into something that we don't have energy to do, or we're starting a process that's going to take a lot of energy that we don't have the energy or will to accomplish. So again, I'm back to what are we doing?
Good questions, and I hear what's being, mentioned across the table, and I work for council, and however council wants to proceed, I will proceed. The question I ask you is, if this ordinance goes away, and tomorrow, the Jade Inn estate, as it's called now, is bulldozed, because that property owner just is not happy with the city and is making a statement, are you gonna be okay looking yourself in the mirror the next day?
But that can be solved with a conservation ordinance.
Conservation district, right?
But if we move forward with this and this goes away, you run into that issue. So you're gonna wanna put up those what I'm gonna call a roadblock or check dams, if you think of a dam, first, before abandoning this process.
Good with that.
I still think this comes down to three really basic options. Do we keep things the way they are? Do we get rid of the whole thing? Or do we figure out some way for reform? I understand the recommendation is written a certain way. It has certain language in it. I never viewed this as any sort of official enforceable ordinance level document. I always viewed it as a working document, a communication to council of here's our values. And I fully support as well the study and all the work that was done. I think the HDC got to a place where they understood their own values, they understood the position of the community. I have a lot of faith in the HDC to do the right thing here. I don't need it to look exactly like this document. What I see is an expression of support for the good work that's been done in the study and support for moving forward with reform, as opposed to, oh, we just want to get rid of the whole thing. If somebody wants to make a motion to get rid of the whole thing, we can have that vote. I think that's fine. I don't know that we need to get into the minutia and details tonight of exactly how this plays out. I think we gave our support for the HDC to seek reform. And honestly, if you guys come back and you say, hey, we mapped this all out, and we just don't have the resources to come anywhere close to this, this is what we come back with now. That's where I was looking for, okay, how do we know about milestones and updates? What's kind of our expectation? Like maybe in 3 months, we get another report. Here's what we came up with. And it could be, okay, here's option A, we would need these resources to go this direction, or here's option B, we would need these resources. But again, it's just 3 options. We keep it the same, we get rid of the whole thing, or we reform it. We can figure out what reform looks like. I have a lot of faith in the HDC because of the values they've expressed there.
I don't think it's not having the faith in HDC. I think it's that I've just heard that really, nobody really has a good direction on where to go. I mean, Jason feels like we're going down the same road. Eddie's waiting for some type of direction. And Stacy says, I'm willing to go however I need to go. But those 3 are really, they can't really do it without any help. So I don't see any enthusiasm there. I think after Jason said he's been on there, what, 1.5 years? I think he's kind of lost.
I think we're tired. I think we did a lot of work, and I think we have so much data that we've compiled that I feel like if our goal at the end of the day is to serve the people of Allegan, I think it's pretty clear what we got to do. In my opinion, they like the historic districts. They don't like the Historic District Commission.
And that was my take at the meeting that I was at. I want to keep my house looking nice, but I can't afford to replace it with what it's on it.
Yep.
I don't want to move forward with the recommendation if we don't also take a look at the sizes of the districts and the homes that are included in them. I think that's just a circular waste.
I did have a motion to reconsider. Is that motion dead, or is there no second?
So can we have discussion? Do we need a second before we discuss it?
I'll support.
Okay. So to what end are we reconsidering this? I'm fine with it, but
Okay.
what's the plan? If we now go back on the vote we just took, why are we doing it? What is our, because I feel like we're just running, or we're chasing our tail, and we're not.
Nothing
And
for 3 hours.
yeah, I don't,
2.5 hours.
I can't walk out of here and have nothing accomplished.
Well, I think it's mostly, from my standpoint, is if we're going forward with exactly how it is, with no application, and we have no enforceability, then why are we going down that path? It's, you're saying you still gotta put an application in, but we have no way to enforce it, so really, you could just ignore us and say, what do I care? I just get my building permit. PCI says, oh, you gotta go through the historic. And they go, well, I challenge you. You guys aren't legitimate under the PA 169, so you have no authority. So that's where I'm at, is if you don't have that application process, then we can't have it just
So
for,
you want to reconsider, so we can restructure this?
so we can restructure it, so
Okay.
we can say, go out, come back with a recommendation that you feel could work and still be within PA 169, or a recommendation of, we're just gonna become a conservation district, and or also look at the resizing of the district. So this would give them to say, the direction is, we know there's deficiencies here. If we want to stay within PA 169, how, do you think we can address those deficiencies? Or you come up with a different recommendation to say, well, now we're just looking at conservation and demolition that we put in a demolition ordinance instead. That's in essence why I'm asking to reconsider, is if we told them to go this route, I don't see where this route ends because there's no enforcement. That's why I'm saying reconsider, and then we can discuss if we want to amend that to say, in essence, like Joel said, go back, come back to us with what, and work with SHPO to say what could work with under PA 169. And if you feel like that's not going to work for the community, let us know that you don't think that's going to work for the community and you feel we should resize the districts or just get rid of the districts. Because I don't see a future if we said, go do this, and you go, well, we did this, but we have no enforcement, so we're sending them down, we're going down kind of a path that doesn't have an end, so.
And I'm fine with that. I just, again, do not see much enthusiasm as the historic district even wants to move forward.
We'll do whatever you guys recommend us to do. We will do it.
It is 9:30 at night.
I know, right?
I will be grumbling the whole time, but we'll do it.
All right, so we do have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, please signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed,
Aye.
same sign. Motion carries.
So now the motion is back on the floor regarding the recommendation, and we can add
Yes.
amendments?
You gotta add amendments, they can fail for a vote.
Yeah, so you just passed a motion to reconsider the first motion. So now you have to do a vote on that original motion. And that, if you do not want to go with that, then you should not vote in the affirmative.
Isn't this a time we can add amendments to that motion?
No, you have to,
The motion's on the table, it's open for discussion.
the motion would need to fail.
The
recon-
motion needs to fail, and then you'll do a third motion on what you want to do. So you have a motion to approve, a motion to reconsider, now you're
So-
voting on that.
So I will make a motion for the to approve the HDC final recommendation.
I'll support.
We have a motion and a support. All in favor, please signal by saying aye. All opposed, same sign?
Aye.
Aye.
Hey,
Now that first motion is erased, now you make another motion and you can make amendments to it as such on what you think it should say.
All right, so somebody say what they wanted to say. You screwed up enough.
I'm out. You guys do your thing.
Right.
I tried to
Okay,
move us
Delora, you
forward.
understand this, go for it. How do you want it?
I make a motion to accept the HDC final recommendation dated November 7th, 2022, with an amendment regarding the application process to be determined after discussion with SHPO.
second?
Is that all we need to have? Is that all, the only change we're making to this?
It's just that application, so then it's.
I thought we just talked a ton about resizing districts and that being a really important aspect to this. I mean, should we just give them some level of flexibility to? Okay, yeah, all right, I'm in favor, sure. Let's just keep it moving.
So
Okay,
we don't feel like we
there's-
need that in there at this point?
I was gonna go with Joel's
Because we
recommendation,
can-
then to have a motion to recommend a study group to resize.
Because it can, right. There'll be another motion after this.
But we're adopting this with this motion, right? So if we adopt this, don't we have, we're just back in the boat that we just were.
Now, if we also ask them to look at resizing, that's what we're saying is, you can have the motion to say, look at streamlining this application process to make it easier. That's in essence, this first motion is, we do need an application. If we're gonna continue having the ordinance, work with SHPO to determine what could work, and that's that application process. And then we can also make a motion post this one to look at resizing or elimination of the district. But
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to accept the November 7, 2022, amended to look at the application process. Correct. All in favor, please signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. No. Motion, oh, one opposed. But I thought you made the motion. I'm not in favor of that. Oh, my God, okay.
I can make the motion, I don't have to vote for it.
All right.
So did we want to discuss at all directing them in, looking at resizing or elimination of the historic district if they feel that the application process won't work for the community? Does anybody have any other discussion on that, or do you just want to look at a motion on it and move on? I do have an early flight in the morning, so I'd like to move on.
I'd be happy to give HDC flexibility to explore whatever options they come
So
up with.
I would make a motion that the HCC works with staff and evaluates if the historic districts need resizing, and if they do, what that process would entail, and come back to us with a recommendation if they feel that that would be the better direction than streamlining the application.
Support.
It has been moved and supported. All in favor, please signal by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Okay, HDC, you good?
We got some work to
With
do.
a smile, Eddie.
Always.
All right. Okay. All
Thank you.
right. Moving on down, the next item is public comment. Any public comment? Hearing none, we'll move on down to number 7, communication from council and commissioners and city staff.
Very quickly, I just want to thank Alan for driving in for this meeting. It's appreciated.
Yes, thank
It's
you.
something state employees do not have to do, so it's a good judgment of his character, so thank you.
Parker or Michaela, do you have anything to add to our?
Nothing tonight.
Thank you. David?
Just reiterate my appreciation for HDC and all the work they did here, and also for council and your patience in seeing this study through. I think we can all agree that was a really good process and helped show a lot of due diligence around this issue.
Thank you. Laura? Mike, do you have anything?
Just, looks like we have something to work on.
Thank you. Peter?
Just appreciative of the work that HEC's been doing on this, and for Alan coming out and being willing to sit through our long meeting and still having a drive to go back to. So thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thanks everyone for putting in long hours tonight and other nights. I don't feel great about where we ended up tonight, but
I know.
we're in a process, I guess.
Thank you, guys. I know it's been a lot of hard work. I hear from Stacy quite often what's going on, so, I know there's been a lot of, due diligence work on you guys' part, so, the committee, so thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get somewhere. Hopefully we don't end up to where we were where we've been the last 3 or 4 years. Alan, thank you for coming over and listening to us. Thank you. I'm sure we'll reach out to you again. All right. With nothing else, it is 9.